Today on the Idiot's Guide, we are talking about censorship. The good, the bad, the ugly. I don't know. Who gives a flying frog? Anyway. And what does a beautiful Victorian era dress, a secret coded note, and 135-year-old meteorology have in common? Tune in and find out. Or in other words, fuck around and find out. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Prophet Hacker, and I'm joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Haslam. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. All right, so I have this thought that the other day, I don't know, like I think you and I were having a conversation about this and about where, like, you know, how far do we push it with our kids, kind of a thing. You know, when do I drop, you know, the nasty word that gets them motivated to do something or whatever it is, you know, like, and, you know, we kind of talked a little bit about our own philosophies or opinion about that, about, you know, where we sit with it and what we feel like we, you know, our tolerance level with our kids. You know, like if my 7-year-old drops an F-bomb in front of me, I'm going to be like, okay, that's cute, but still like, I don't know, you know, but if my 15-year-old does in some sort of expression, you know, there's some tolerance there. And so it's both of those situations are learning opportunities in my home, not necessarily not learning about the taste of soap or hot sauce. It's, you know, and side note, I had a friend who absolutely hated Tabasco sauce because anytime he said anything bad or nasty, he would get Tabasco sauce, not on his tongue, under his tongue. So like just add to the burn and excruciating pain. Just, ugh.
Yeah, that's maybe a parenting topic for another podcast there.
Yeah. We'll talk about child abuse on a different one. But, you know, this is a fun subject. I mean, it really is, because there's lots of different opinions. I think, you know, it depends on what circles you're in and where you are in the world, and all of those things, all those factors matter. What kind of job situation, your context is really, really important. And even in my studies about kind of some of this stuff, a lot of it came down to context, or what would be judiciously, you know, making sure that you're putting this in place where it can belong. Yeah. And maybe tempering it when you're not in that kind of a setting, so that you're not, you know, blasting somebody that, you know, it's like a family of 7 and all the kids are, you know, under 5. And you're like, okay, sorry. Yeah. I didn't mean to educate your kids like that, but, yeah, I mean, it's true. So I think I'm not really sure where to start with this, other than, you know, you've kind of come up with some research and some definitions, and I really want to unpack that. We'll drop a couple of these curse words ahead of time. So just a fair warning to our listeners, you know, it's not meant in a way that is derogatory towards anybody. It's to educate you guys on this. And I reviewed YouTube's explicit content warnings and that kind of stuff to make sure that we can abide by what their policy says, so that eventually someday we might be able to have some advertisers on here.
There you go. But what we're talking about today is really about swear words and why we call them swear words and why we censor them out of everything.
Yeah.
You know, and as parents, we censor our children. TV, radio, they censor what goes on the air. So I think one of the, I watch a TV show called QI, which is a British TV show, and they are allowed 1 F-bomb per show on the BBC. And so, because they've talked about it on that show before, someone dropped one, and that was their one for the show. And they usually have to get it pre-approved before they're even allowed to air it as part of the show. But U.S. television has the same rules. I don't know specifically what they are. But yeah, these censorship rules. And the question is, why are we censoring certain words? Censorship is a big thing right now. There's a lot of push on censoring books, censoring certain things online, certain topics, certain websites. And the question is, why do we censor?
Yeah.
And so we're today talking specifically about swear words, air quotes for those just listening to the podcast, not on the YouTube. And where it came from. Why are swear words now becoming more common than they were previously, or more acceptable as common? And so we're going to be dropping a couple of these words.
Yeah.
So just be warned. Now, my personal view is words are words. And so any of these curse words, swear words, what other descriptors are there?
Derogatory.
Any of these things, they're words.
Obscenities.
Yeah. It's the intent with which you use the word that is more important than the word itself. Okay. Now, we will not be using the N-word. We are two white guys. And so that is nowhere in our territory. There are some topics that we want to talk about that are more sensitive, but we're going to bring in people within those groups that will talk about, because again, two white guys have really no place to talk about feminism, to talk about seriously about race discrimination, things like that.
And my wife and I go to a karaoke night pretty regularly, and at the karaoke night, they had a competition recently where there was one guy, very, very white guy, like cardigan and glasses kind of white guy, and he not that other people that aren't white can't wear cardigans and glasses, but it was just like, you can picture a librarian like this, and this guy gets up and starts just rapping like no other. I can't remember. He came up with this actually kind of catchy nickname for himself for MCing, and it was like MC Andrew, but it was way better than my pretend thing there. But most of the songs that he was rapping in all had the N-word in it. And this is a place that I mean, they're probably not going to get in trouble to do that. It's kind of okay. But even for me, I went up and I sang a song that had it a few times in it, and I just made sure that I didn't say it. I skipped over that word, or I how you kind of censor it halfway. You're like, right. And that's it. And
and there are cultural reasons why certain cultures or subcultures, it's perfectly okay to use certain words, whereas others, it's not.
Yeah.
One of my favorite swear words is the word bloody.
Yeah.
Now, in the United States, even in the Americas, North America, talking about Canada, United States, other English-speaking that come from a British background, bloody is nothing.
Right.
It's a normal word.
It's a horror movie.
Right. I grew up, we watched a lot of British shows growing up. I don't know why. We learned proper British. I think we've talked about it before. We had to learn the proper using utensils, the American way.
All 12 of them.
Yeah. And the British way. So I grew up with a lot of these, with this British influence. Even now, I watch a lot of
yes,
British
Joe,
TV
we
shows.
all know your royalty.
That's right. And so I use the word bloody a lot. Now, again, in the United States, not a big deal. If this is airing in England, these would potentially have to be bleeped out. And so, using certain words in certain subcultures, it's perfectly fine. Whereas others are not. And that's because the subculture is the one that's defining that use. Now, a lot of the ones that we're going to be talking about today don't necessarily have a subculture idea behind them. They are all generally all English speaking cultures see these as negative words. But since we're talking about bloody, I am going to read a little bit of background to this one.
Okay.
Because this leads into why suddenly we started censoring words. So it was used as an intensifier. So everything that I'm going to be reading today, came from Wiktionary. Bloody, has been used, as early as, until at least the early 18th century, the word was used innocuously. So again, all this is coming from Wiktionary. This is all the etymology. This is the history. So now some of this may be incorrect because it's a wiki, but I generally trust Wiktionary
Okay.
to be able to give a lot of this information.
Just can't cite it in a college paper. That's all.
Yeah, well. And again, I think Wiktionary is a little bit different from Wikipedia, because more people go onto Wikipedia and make changes than they do on Wiktionary. But anyway, so it was innocuous. It wasn't a big word. Using bloody was no big deal until the mid 18th century. So we're talking about 1750s-ish. And then all of a sudden, it became more quote unquote profane. And in 1755, it started to be called a very vulgar word. And in the 1888 Oxford English Dictionary, the word is now constantly in the mouths of the lowest classes, but by respectable people considered a horrid word on par with obscene or profane language. So that was in the Oxford Dictionary for the word bloody. And so somehow it went from this everyday word to somehow a very profane word and obscene. Nothing changed about the word. It just became that way. Now, one thing that's mentioned in there is it is now constantly in the mouths of the lowest classes. And a lot of times when we're looking at these swear words, it's because it was in common use by the quote unquote lowest classes. So the most basic of people, and the ones that were defining word use and defining proper language were the upper class. You know, the professors, the rich people, the people who had this air of superiority around them. And so because these words were used so commonly, they became bad. And that actually goes into, if we look at, I've got definitions for some of the main, what we call these words.
Okay.
So we often hear the word vulgar. So these are vulgar things to talk about. Okay. That word comes from the Latin meaning vulgaris.
Okay.
So that's the original Latin term, and it means common folk. And so vulgar language is the commonly spoken language. So it's the most basic words spoken.
It would almost be like the use of that word in correlation to like the evolution of the word bloody. Vulgar started to coincide with it because it was referring to common folk.
Exactly. And so that's why, the first time in 1755, it was called very vulgar. It was spoken by the people.
Yeah.
But it wasn't spoken by the elite. It was the people's words. And then when we think about profane, so profanity, that comes from Latin profanus, and that means not religious or unclean.
Okay.
So that's the origin of profane. And then the next one is to swear. So these are swear words. Well, all that means in all history is to take an oath.
Yeah.
So, I swear.
I solemnly swear.
Right,
to tell
exactly.
The truth and nothing but the truth.
Yeah, exactly. That's a common swear that we all generally know. And so they're swear words. And I'll get into it in a minute where that comes from. But then we've got the last one, obscene, which comes from Latin obscenus. Not much changes from the old Latin in all of these, which means inauspicious, ominous, disgusting, filthy, offensive, repulsive, indecent, or lewd.
Which is basically all of the things
Yeah.
we're talking about.
And so, when I look at this, these aren't swear words. They're not vulgar words because they're spoken by all people. So I guess it's not of the most lowly people, that being the definition of vulgar. It's not necessarily profane. So saying the word ass is not profane. So it's not talking about religion. It's not making a swear. So I'm not taking an oath. But what we have done is all of these obscenities, which are based on common standards of decency, we've started using these other terms for obscene.
I think and this kind of goes with how my household, we see swearing.
Yeah.
And take the word ass, for example. If I'm just saying, honestly, like in our normal dialect, like I think about it's pretty much derogatory unless I'm referring to a donkey. Like that's it, But other than that, like if you're a dumbass, that's a normal phrase. But how that applies in my household is we say if you hear a swear word, and let's say you hear a swear word and you're like, oh, that's a swear word. But it's not used in a context where they're putting someone down or offending or targeting somebody. So if I call somebody a dumbass, that's directly at them. That's right. Derogatory. And so that's something where that in my household, we're like, that's swearing. Okay. But if I was just like, man, that was badass, that's not necessarily bad,
Yeah. It's and that's where when I talk about now, I don't ever swear because it's just not part of my vocabulary. Now, again, I do say bloody, but in the US that's not really swearing, quote unquote swearing. It's not obscene.
My son forces me to use dumbass or smartass.
Oh.
Actually, it's not dumbass. He forces me to use smartass because his middle name is Alec. And so when I go, hey, stop being such a smart Alec, he's like, but that's my name. And I'm like, I was like, then stop being such a smart ass.
But yeah, and so the idea that, and the reason I avoid swearing is because there are better ways to insult someone. There are better ways to say things than to use just this common base language. And so I like to come up with creative stuff. So I've actually got a list here of Shakespeare insults.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'll go through those a little bit later when we're talking about, some of the meanings of these.
You're gonna hurl them at me, just you are, thou shalt. And,
I do desire that we may be better strangers. I love.
It's great because I understand it.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, it's better than these words because it's so much more creative. So I like being creative with my insults.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so when we look at these words, when we look at the history of what these words mean, they're really innocuous. And even I've got definitions for some of the more common words, and they really haven't changed. But what happened was society changed. And society decided that there was now a need to not be as base or as common. Another change that happened was the idea that there was more adherence to a religious doctrine. And this is actually why we call them swear words. Because they're not swear words. We aren't making a swear. Mm-hmm. But it was during the Victorian era that a lot of these things changed.
Okay.
In all my research, there was no consensus, and there's still a lot of arguments as to why this changed. Some see religious revivals as being cause of it. Some see the recent losses in war as being a part of it. There were a lot of potential reasons, but no historians have come to a consensus as to what it was. It's just for some reason in the 1700s, there was this sudden shift into a more decent view. So this is what I found. So in the Victorian area, and this comes from Harold Perkins, The Origins of Modern English Society, written in 1969. We are trying to cite more.
Yes.
So that's why there's more citations. Between 1780 and 1850, the English ceased to be one of the most aggressive, brutal, rowdy, outspoken, riotous, cruel, and bloodthirsty nations in the world, and became one of the most inhibited, polite, orderly, tender-minded, prudish, and hypocritical. Now, the really interesting thing about that is that was in 1780 when roughly that started. Well, that was after America had already won its independence. And so how this impacted the United States and the American society, again, not really sure, but it has, even after our independence from England. Mm-hmm. And so, but one of the reasons why we call them swear words is because during this time, there was a stronger adherence to biblical doctrine. And the specific Bible verse is this one. Now, Adam is a youth minister. He is devout Christian.
I have cussed out many teenagers.
And he was not even aware of this as a doctrine when we were talking about this earlier. So I don't think even a lot of people understand that this is where the idea of swear words come from.
Yeah.
But this is Matthew 5, verse 33 through 37. I wasn't aware of this either, just to be clear, but I'm pointing out Adam because
he's picking on me.
Exactly. One of my rare opportunities to be able to do that. So again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And so in society at this time, there was basically a prohibition of people following the Bible to make an oath of any kind. Yeah. So even just saying, I swear I didn't do it, that would have been offensive.
Well, I mean, like I looked up a couple of those, like cross my heart and swear to God. I swear on my mother's grave. I swear on my life, swear on everything I hold dear. I pledge on my honor. I solemnly swear. I vouch for it. I give my word. I promise on everything sacred to me. I stake my reputation on it, and I affirm with all my heart. I mean, those are just a few.
Yeah.
But, those are the things where you're like, I pinky promise or pinky swear. Like that my daughter and I do that. Swear. I'm like, man, I mean, like we're sinners.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. And so swearing and constant swearing and the use of these base words, the vulgar words commonly used by the people, were seen as the same thing.
Yeah.
And so they became synonymous with swears. And so they became swear words.
Huh.
And so we have all these words, and it's just because of common swearing. Now, again, there's a lot of different things that were happening at this time. So the entire change of society to say that all these swear words are now bad was not just because of a religious doctrine. It's just they all occurred at the same time. And so now we call them swear words. And they are bad words.
There's a series that I watched on Netflix about 2 years ago, I think is when it came out, called The History of Swearing. And Nicolas Cage is the host. And it's really entertaining. It's funny. They talk about all, Yeah, all the swear words you can imagine. Definitely not a family-friendly show.
Can't imagine.
But it's interesting to see, like, what we're talking about here. They didn't even talk about the Victorian era of kind of this beginning of censorship. They just talked about the evolution of these swear words themselves. And I think what's interesting is, like, some of the definitions I believe that you have here, honestly, are similar, but one of the ones that, like, I think, they go through a couple other ones that we're not going to talk about today, but like, let's say, for example, the F word. The F word. And I want to kind of dive into that history, so I don't want to let too much out of the bag. But I think it's cool if you're wanting a little bit more out of this than just our show, and then check that out. It's definitely entertaining, and they make it fun. I hope that they there's lots more swear words, so there's plenty of room for another season. So
Now remember, knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have, the more power that you have.
Yeah.
And that's important. That's why we're talking about swear words, because it's when you know where they come from, when you know why they are seen the way they are, the more control you have over the world around you. You know why people have an issue with it. When to use it, when not to use it, based on the people that you're around. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of reasons to understand why swear words are considered what they are. And so that's why we're talking about it, because this is a part of, being a human and having communication, having language, and I think just about every language in the world has some kind of swear word, where it's one word that's being used for something else, which is what a lot of these are, or inherent swear words, which is what the F word is. Yeah. So going right into that one. And now the reason why we're not saying fuck is because YouTube does specifically limit the number that we would be allowed to say. And so we are going to continue using the F word for that one specifically, because of YouTube restrictions, etc.
Well, the other
so we're up to 2 so far.
Right. Yes. And I think I don't know how many more we can say before we get flagged. And you just have to be very transparent about what you say in there. And for the most part, yes, we're up to 2, but I'm probably going to bleep the first one.
Sounds good. So the F word is actually one of the few words that has always been an obscene word. Yeah. It has always meant what it still means today, which is to essentially, so most of the time when you use the F word, it connotes go have sex.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it means. Now we use it for other things, but that's still kind of always implied.
And the myth that it's fornication under the consent of the king is not actually true.
For uncarnal knowledge, or for unallowed carnal knowledge or whatever, that also not true. There are a lot of false reasonings for all these words. Now we have done the research. We've gone back to the history to find out. I've checked all of the references in Wiktionary to make sure that all this is accurate. So the F word, is the first word, for this. And we may have to bleep some of this out. Now, these are city names. These are, actual words here. Okay. But in 772 AD, a charter that gave mention to a place called F***erham, okay, which may mean ham, which is home, of the f***er, or pasture of the f***er.
Okay.
Okay. So that is in the charter for a city, hamlet, home in 772 AD.
I'll just see if I can find the map where it shows that.
In 1278, there was record of an individual named John LaFucker.
I've heard about that one.
Yep.
What an unfortunate name. Like, even that household, like, those are two very unfortunate things to be associated. I mean, not necessarily, unfortunate, but still, like in general, when you're addressing yourself or, some sort of formal address, you're like, and welcome to the ballroom, Mr.
Well, and again, I mean, these could be insults made by some county clerk that hated this guy.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it could
so
be a brothel that first house was.
right.
Yeah.
there are a lot of reasons why, but that word, the F word, has always had this connotation of some kind of sexual implication,
Okay.
or insult. And so there's another one in court documents from Cheshire, England, mentions a man called Roger by the navel.
Interesting.
And it states in here, and this was in 1310, states in here possibly tongue-in-cheek or directly suggestive of a depraved sexual act.
1310?
1310.
Goodness sake. That's a long time ago.
This is how long that word has been a part of it. And this is one where it has not changed. There hasn't been any change in how it's used in all of that time. It has always been obscene. It's always been a bad word. Air quotes. And it was first listed in a dictionary in 1598. So I've got a lot of other fun ones here. So that is one of the words that has always been a bad word used, used to despair people.
I'm definitely going to have to censor
Disparage.
most of them.
Now we'll go into
YouTube will stop that.
Yeah, we'll go into some of these other ones. So bitch, is another one, and that comes
Female
from.
dog.
Well, actually, it comes from Proto-Germanic, just meaning dog.
Oh, okay.
So it actually changed to become female dog because it started being used as a pejorative toward women. Now, even today, we still call, she's a dog, to say that someone's ugly or anything like that.
Even if you're like talking to another guy and you're like, stop being such a bitch. Like it's in reference to being more like being weaker and being
right,
less masculine.
Right. And the translation of that. So again, it's a word that it comes from Proto-Germanic into English. It's biksha, I think is the pronunciation. And it just means dog. And it's just over time turned into bitch in English today. And the description of applying that to people is what changed the word into a pejorative word.
Okay.
And so applying it to someone, calling someone a dog, and then over time, those characteristics of dog behavior then became the definition of bitch when using it as a pejorative against someone else. And so the original term is a dog, which is still in some ways what it's used today in dog breeding. And a lot of times it's how you're representing the characteristics when you're calling someone that in a negative tone.
Mm-hmm.
The next one on here, ass. So ass comes from the Latin asinus, which means a donkey. Or it means an ass, cretin, idiot, dolt, blockhead. Or a slow-witted, inept person. Now, that was the definition, according to Wiktionary, of the Latin word asinus. So even back in Latin, this was used as a pejorative to people who were dim-witted.
Okay.
Comparing them to a donkey.
I think about that, and I'm trying to think of translation from biblical context because they use ass in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And like when Jesus rides into Jerusalem, he's riding in on an ass.
Yeah.
And, when he does that, it's this, the Greek is what the text is written in the New Testament. And so it's translated into the Latin, which would be, I wonder what the Greek word is. Be curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't have, there may be an equivalent word for a donkey, but it has not come to.
But very obviously, like ours is, based from Latin.
Right. And so the idea that, when you call someone, you're an ass,
Yeah.
you're calling them a dimwitted, a stupid, idiot, things like that. Now, even those words, in a lot of times, calling someone stupid, idiot, especially with little kids, we see that, oh, that's a bad word.
Right.
And that's because it's used to...
We're using it against or to somebody.
Right,
Yep.
exactly. But yeah, so ass has never meant someone's backside. And yet somehow today we have associated this dim-witted idea to the butt. There was nothing on how that change happened, but somehow that change has come in over all that time. But ass just means a dim-witted person or a donkey. Damn is the next one. And that comes from Latin damnare, which means to condemn or to inflict loss upon. And so that's another one where that same idea is still present today. So damn you is to condemn someone. And so you are using that same thing. Now, interestingly, when I was looking at this, a lot of people don't like saying the word damn when it comes to the edifice that holds water back. Mm-hmm. And so they'll try to make sure they either call it the name of the dam. So, oh yeah, Hoover Dam or a Beaver Dam or anything like that to avoid saying the word dam.
Well, like, in my youth group, we used to go to this snow camp thing, and we would sled down the dam, but we would go like, oh yeah, we're going to go sledding on the darn, and all the kids knew exactly what we were talking about. But it was in the same kind of context that we're doing here. We're like, I don't want to call it a dam. Like, yeah, because then all the kids are going to be like, swear word.
Interestingly, when I looked up, because I had to look up dam, the edifice that holds back water, to see where that history came from, it is also Latin, and the original Latin word is dam with 2 M's. And so when I was looking at, we've actually shortened the condemnation version of the word, which was damnare, to dam, and the original word of dam, the edifice that holds back water, is the same as it always has been, just dropped off the extra M. And so we've changed damnare into this. So dam came first, dam came second.
I'm going to go back to ass real fast because I have a Strong's dictionary on my phone. So Strong's is basically just a language translator for biblical phrases, whether it's Greek text or Hebrew text. Back in Genesis, this word shows up 17 times, and it's shamor. Shamor is Hebrew for a male ass. And then in Matthew, it shows up 3 times, I think, or 5 times, 3 times. And the word is onos, it's onos is what it is. Primary word for a donkey. So an ass. So not really related in sound. You still get the linguistic side of it comes from the Latin as opposed to it coming from the Greek. Yeah. But we do have words that come from Greek, just not this one.
And then the last one I have here, again, we're not going to do a ton of words, but the last one I have here is shit, which comes from Proto-West Germanic, skitty and skitya, and Old English shite.
Shite. Where's your scheisse?
Yeah.
That's German.
Scheite is diarrhea.
Oh.
So shite is dung. Now, even in England today, saying the word shite is equivalent to shit.
Okay.
And so that word is exactly the same. We use it mainly as a word for excrement.
And again, it doesn't mean store high in transit. It's not a shipping phrase.
No, that's all bunk. It came from the old Germanic, Proto-West Germanic and Old English. Over time, it's just become shit from skitty. Again, I don't speak Proto-West Germanic, so my pronunciations are way wrong. But you can look these up on Wiktionary. But the idea is, now today we use it for a little bit more, but you can see how the translation, get your shit out of here. you are speaking negatively about these objects that you want to get out of there.
There's a great comedy bit that talks about the word shit and how many variations it has for all sorts of different things, like to actually take a shit, to being the shit, to, you know, like a stupid shit, to everything else in between. Like there's so many, you have to, like, if you have a chance, I'll see if I can find it and link it in the video, in the show notes, just because it's really entertaining. It's from somebody who isn't from the US, and so they had to learn the English language, and they're kind of picking on this word because they're like, it's so confusing. Like at some point it's really mean and saying something. Some point it's just having to go to the bathroom, and some point you're just awesome, and that's what you are. And all of it is that one word. And so it's just it's that makes the English language even more confusing because of it.
And what we're seeing, so this started in, like I said, the late 1700s, mid 1800s, when a lot of these things started changing. Yeah. And what we're seeing today is a new evolution of language. So back during that time, these words were heavily redacted. Even today, starting in about the 60s, we started seeing these words coming up more often. They became to be reused in common language. And there was a lot of fight against that. You mentioned earlier that the censorship in the 1980s with movie
NWA.
ratings, TVs,
Ice Cube.
there you go. All these things came in to try to limit the use of these words.
There was like a league of moms that came through to start to actually rate movies.
Yeah. And so all that came in because they were trying to keep those old values going. And it takes time. So even here we've got, this was, 70 years of transition.
Yeah.
From what they said, the riotous, outspoken, cruel, to polite, orderly, tender-minded. That took about 70 years. We're in the midst of this change. And so we're seeing a lot of these arguments, these fights back and forth about what words should be used, shouldn't be used, when should you use them, when shouldn't you use them. That's why there's a lot of argument going on right now. It's not because there's some inherent value to these words. It's how we're using words and how as a society we define our conduct around each other. Mm-hmm. And so just because someone uses quote unquote foul language or doesn't define who they are as a person. It's just how they communicate. And so knowing what these words are, knowing that this is just a cultural shift going on right now, it's kind of cool.
So over the last years, it's actually done a significant shift to this. And it coincides with kind of a lot better research regarding mental health. And I have an article. It's Why Swearing Holds Surprising Benefits. A window into intelligence, pain management, and more. It's interesting. This article is written by Alex. Literally, that's it, Alex. Yeah. And it's Orlando Medical News. There's a chance this is AI. A lot of this information, though, it seems to be drawing from many other sources that have the same information, similar information about, what's been said out there. This is just the most recent article I could find. But this goes back, like the latest or the earliest one I saw was 2011, was talking about how this all connects together, and
Mythbusters
emotional intelligence and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Mythbuster did an entire episode on pain management and swearing, and I found that swearing was more beneficial to pain management than if you were to say any other word.
Studies have shown that well-educated people with a wide range of words at their disposal are better at producing curse words than those with less verbal fluency. This suggests a correlation between language ability and intelligence. The other thing that it talks about, so it's a sign of intelligence in that sort of definition.
So since I don't swear, are you calling me stupid?
Technically, this is. Another benefit is a potential indicator of honesty. So, if I'm really pissed, you're going to know I'm pissed.
Yeah.
By the way, pissed is a swear word in the South.
Yeah.
Pain tolerance and swearing. So there's been studies on the Netflix show that I talked about. They actually do this thing. They record it happening, and basically they stuck their hand in ice cold water with ice in it and just holding it there. And the study they basically timed how long you can last. And the individuals, when they first tried it and they stuck their hand in, and then they weren't allowed to swear. And so like they just timed how long that took. And then it was I don't want to, I was like 3 times the length, like significantly longer, if you were allowed to swear through the process. So you're just sitting there with your hand in ice water, just beep, 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 swear words, cuss, and it's really entertaining to kind of think about that. Like the show was fantastic when they did this, but the premise behind it is it talks about how it triggers a stress reaction in your body, and that response of you swearing is part of that kind of like satisfying, like, when my body, those endorphins kick in, I have to do something with them, and communicating that kind of expels some of that energy that you're there. And it also gets your mind thinking about what you're going to say next, colorfully, rather than it being about your hand freezing off. Yeah. The other one is swearing holds surprising benefits, a sign of creativity. So they say that basically swearing activates on the right side of your brain, which your right side of your brain is typically the creative side. And because of that, they attribute it to, you're more creative in essence because you can swear. I don't know how true that is.
Yeah. That may be an old study that has since been debunked. So the thing, I mean, even some things we've said in the past have been, in recent studies. We try to get the most recent studies available for all this information. We're not going to go back and correct anything because half the time we don't even remember what we talked about in prior episodes. But always keep up with the most up-to-date information. Keep up with current detail. This is what we always talk about on this is education. Educate yourself. Yep. We try to educate you, but as things change, as we learn new stuff, the important thing is continually learn and accept new information.
I think that the universal nature of swearing is actually kind of accurate. I don't know if it's necessarily swearing, it's more body language. But if like in this, they're talking about how in many different languages, across different languages, swearing or cursing can, in our modern definition of that, is something that is recognized across the world. It doesn't really take a lot. Like you could yell with a aggressive tone, "F you," and everyone's going to know what you just said.
Right.
Okay. But on the other side of it, you're going to get, you could say anything at that point. Like if you don't understand the language and somebody's just aggressively saying something, it can construe the same message. And they've seen this sort of kind of function of that body language by observing monkeys throwing poop at each other.
Well, that is pretty good. But I think the same idea comes through. So if you ever are in need of help, the advice that I was always told is don't yell help.
Right.
You yell fire.
Right.
And by yelling fire, that immediately gets people. Now, we all should respond when someone yells help, but responding to fire is, I think, more of that instinctual across all levels. I don't know if it's because it's, starts with an F or given the letters that are in it. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of idea why mom is generally the same across all languages.
Yeah.
Because it's, an infant's first verbalization, the movements of the mouth, everything, mom in some form or other comes out.
But I'm with the monkeys. Like, I think instead of swearing at people, I'm just going to throw shit. Somebody turns around and
all right.
You just, Yes, I did. And I meant it.
I don't know which way I want the t-shirt to read. Throw shit, not shade, or throw shade, not shit. I'm not sure. Maybe we have one of each, but I think that's going to be our first merch idea, is a t-shirt that just has that on it. But yeah, and so and these ideas, these things,
It has to be a poop emoji though. It can't be the actual.
yes, exactly. But it's that whole thing. I mean, every language we've talked about, I mean, these come from Latin. I mean, these words have not changed. The F word has been that way for at least 1,000 years, as the same form as we use it today. I mean, this is common.
Yeah.
And it persists. Every language has these things, but understanding what they are, I mean, that gives you more ability to use them in the best way possible, whether as an insult, whether as a pejorative, or simply as going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's just recognizing, one of the things that it really stresses in this article is just, like I said at the very beginning, it's knowing the context you're in. It's really crucial to know that, and judiciously applying, when you're going to say such things. You don't want to do that in a daycare. But like if you're on a job site, a construction job site, I'm pretty sure everybody else is doing the same thing, speaking that language. And so you almost are joining in so that you're understood.
Right.
Because if you try to speak too highbrow, they're probably not going to let you stay there very long. They're going to kick you out of there. But,
right.
I think what's interesting is it's kind of like this, constant, I don't know, like determining or deciphering what, what's the best scenario in that situation. And very similar to that is a note that came across, was found actually hidden and crumpled and hidden inside of a Victorian era dress. Really odd location for it. Okay. And this note was actually coded. So it was different words randomly jumbled together. If you were to read it, there's, and I'll see if I'll link the article, but All Things Interesting basically is where I get this from, or I think that's what it is. All the Things Interesting by Kalina Fraga. She did an article about this, but basically a coded note found hidden in a Victorian era dress has finally been solved. So this dress was found about 10 years ago. It was purchased by a gal. Her name was Sarah Rivers Cofield. She came across this beautiful dress and purchased it, and she has like a collection of period clothing and that kind of stuff. And then upon, basically like looking over the dress to make sure that all the seams are solid and everything, comes across this hidden note that's tucked away inside this dress. And like the first part of it's like, if I were to say this, phrases including like in a line, Calgary, Cuba, Ungard, Confute, Duck, Fagan. Nobody knows. Like that's not even a sentence. That's nothing, right?
The ramblings of an insane person.
Seriously. And for 10 years, it's really just been that stump. Like nobody could figure this out until Chan, his name is Wayne Chan, not Wayne Chung. Sorry, that was terrible, but I had to. University of Manitoba, Wayne Chan, he determined that the note was filled with codes meant to represent weather observations. This note was written back in 1888, which is interesting that you have an 1888. I thought that was quite interesting. So he first tried, he was trying to everything. He studies this at the university, and he was trying everything he possibly could figure out, like nothing, none of his code breaking, nothing whatsoever, going back to World War II era stuff and trying to figure out what this was. And basically he basically almost 200 code books he went through to see if he could figure it out. And then eventually came across this book, late 19th century, on telegraph history, and described similar codes used by the U.S. Army Signal Corps and U.S. Weather Bureau. to transmit weather information across North America. So then he reached out to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who shared a telegraph code from 1892, a code book for weather. And in that, with that, he was able to decipher what this code said.
Wow.
And so just to kind of give you a little bit, so Bismarck omit leafage buck bank. Okay. That's one of the lines. Okay. And you see this, like, if you look at this, it's a picture with like this chicken scratch and a check mark next to it. And you're like, okay, this is weird. Okay. Translate. Bismarck Station in the North Dakota Territory, or Dakota Territory, present day North Dakota, on May 27th, 1888 at 10 p.m. The temperature was 56 degrees Fahrenheit. The barometric pressure was 30.08 Hg, and the dew point was 32 degrees. The weather was clear and dry, and the wind was blowing at 12 miles per hour. How in the world all of that came from Bismarck omit leafage buck bank? I don't give a buck. Like, you know, like it doesn't make any sense to me. But
I mean, it makes sense why they'd be using Signal like that. I mean, for those of you that are old enough to remember old cell phone plans where you had to pay per text message or per minute on a call. So, I mean, we're talking probably anyone older than 25?
This is tucked away in a Victorian era dress.
Well, yeah, the further back we go, I mean, you had telegraph lines that were, you know, limited on how much information could go across. You had to pay for every word on a telegram. It makes sense that you had to get it as limited as possible, as few words to convey your idea. Kind of like text message today.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, I was joking with somebody yesterday, actually, oddly enough, it was a news anchor that I was talking to. We were joking about 1-800-COLLECT and the commercials about like, you know, like had a baby, it's a boy, you know, and that's it. Like they don't actually pick up the call. They just leave that message for somebody to get the 1-800-COLLECT call.
Yeah. Well, I think about text messages today, you know, text messages that I get from my kids. And even we use them, you know, OMW LOL. Or I guess it would be LOL OMW. Laugh out loud, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
Or on my way.
Well, I mean, if you talk about Gen Z, that is the entire dialect heading in that direction.
Right. It's all just, I mean, someone 200 years from now looking
Cursive
back
is expiring and it's getting replaced by FRFR. That's it.
FRFR.
For real.
Oh, gosh. See, I still don't even know all of them. But you think 200 years from now, anyone looking at these text messages from kids today, it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to kind of see that parallel between, you know, trying to translate these messages from back then to, I mean, even messages today.
So in this, the problem that they ran into and the reason why it was so difficult for him to find it is because if you think this is just, you know, what's going on, the weather, like a weather forecaster in the late 1800s. And so it's not something where you're like, we need to preserve this in our history archives forever. No, it's a note to update about, you know, May 27th at 10 p.m.
Yeah, it's like when you go online and look at weather.com and what's the weather?
I still don't understand the mystery of why it was smuggled in some Victorian era dress. That does not make any sense to me. The speculation is that like the closest thing they could get to it was there's an individual's name that's in there. So notes that Chan's attempt to find any woman named Bennett working for the Army Signal Corps. So he identified a named Bennett, the name Bennett on the document, and couldn't figure that out through the Signal Corps records. And but he did find a man named Maitland Bennett working as a clerk in there. And then, but during that time, his wife was 8 months pregnant, so she couldn't fit into a Victorian era dress.
I mean, how many times do you pick up a receipt from the ground and put it in your pocket? You're
It's the 1800s. There's no receipt.
well, no, but there were receipts in the 1800s.
So this wasn't found in North Dakota either. The lady who got this dress is in Maine.
Well, I mean, it probably came from someone named Bennett, and she was the wife of the telegraph operator or the clerk in the telegraph operator's office that had it. She stuck it in her pocket, and it went from there. I mean, how many times do you do laundry and you pull it out and there's a receipt in your pocket because you forgot it was there?
My dear sweet Eleanor, will you deliver this to the local weather station on your way abouts today?
Yeah, I mean, who knows how it got there? But I mean, as innocuous as you just put it in your pocket.
Don't you know?
It's not smuggled.
Dumbass. All right, we got to stop.
All right,
we didn't get the insults in. Do you want to say a few more before we part ways with our listener?
Yeah, we'll leave you with some good Shakespearean insults here.
Yes.
I'll beat thee, but I would infect my hands.
Ooh.
I've got a couple of these that are highlighted that I love. These are just in all of his different plays. More of your conversation would infect my brain.
Wow.
I fear some people think about that in our podcast. The tartness of his face sours ripe grapes.
Ugh. That's like, you are ugly.
Thine face is not worth sunburning.
Should I interpret it like into modern English?
They actually, on the side, I got some of these. They have that. Let's meet as little as we can. You are as a candle, the better burnt out. Sorry, I was covering my face again. Sorry. Your abilities are too infant-like for doing much alone.
Oh.
Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, those were my favorites right there. So if you need good insults, just take those from Shakespearean to modern English, and those are perfect insults.
We'll make sure to, I mean, I would even leave it the way that it is so that people have no idea that you just insulted them. That's actually one of my favorite things to do is if I'm going to hurl an insult, it's going to go right over the top of their head until later. And then they're like, hey, and then you're like, I'm already gone. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And I don't swear because I like to get creative with this,
Yeah.
Obviously I use bloody, but, there's a lot of these things where you use it or you don't. It's personal choice. So now there are some cases, again, we're talking about the words themselves.
Yeah.
When you use the tone, when you inflict an idea through your tone to someone else, that's the worst part of it.
It's almost like the difference between swearing and cursing. If I was to say cursing is typically targeted at somebody. So if I was to use a swear word, or then the context of it would be swear word as an insult to somebody is a curse.
Yeah, I could see someone. Yeah,
kind of that correlation.
There's no real definition for this because it doesn't really mean anything. We as a society and society changes have defined what these words mean and how to use them and this and that.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, don't swear at kids. But,
well, that's the theme of our show today. Don't swear at kids.
But even that in and of itself is a censorship that we as a society have accepted.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to censorship, it's all about society. The inherent ideas there, the words themselves, not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the words don't carry bad things. We as a society have put bad definitions or a bad connotation behind these words. And that's what makes them bad or obscene or swear words. I prefer...
In other words, stop being a little bitch.
I wouldn't say that. But yeah, don't call them swear words.
Resist.
Don't call them vulgar. Don't call them profane.
This is probably the last time we're ever going to be on YouTube.
Exactly. Again, this is about education. This is about learning what these words are, how best to communicate with people around you. Yeah. How do you communicate best? How is the best way to convey an idea? Sometimes that means using an obscenity. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. Understanding the background, the value, and the use of these words is so vital. And I think we censor them so much that we don't learn what they really are about. And the less that we censor that, the more we can come to a greater knowledge, a greater understanding, and a greater ability to communicate.
Well, life's too short. Try not to take yourself too seriously. Keep laughing and learning, and remember, idiots have way more fun.
Check your shoes.